Well, we are 1 minute over 10, so it's time to start. First of all, I would like to present myself. My name is Jakub Godzimirski. I am research professor at NUPI. I have been at NUPI since 1995, working mostly on various aspects of Russian foreign and security policy. Today we have a very good opportunity to dig into various aspects of this policy, but also in a given geographical context, because what we are going to do today is we are going to present some of the findings of a project that NUPI was involved in together with our colleagues from Bucharest in Romania, New Strategy Center, which is one of the leading Romanian think tanks. And the idea, this is not the first project that we have conducted, carried on together with our colleagues from Bucharest. This is in fact the third project that we have been involved. The first one dealt with various aspects of security, broadly understood in two geographical contexts: the High North, where we from Norway looked at how the situation in the field of security has developed over the past years. Then we were involved in a small project that got very generous funding from the Ministry of Defense on various aspects of security in the Black Sea region and in the High North. And then we applied for an extension of the Flanks project to into something that turned out to become Flanks 2. And the idea was to look at not necessarily those military aspects of security, but how other instruments of power are deployed by various types of states in the High North and in the Black Sea region, in order to learn more about how Russia, because Russia is in the very center of this attention we have we have decided to have in this project, how Russia deploys various non-military instruments of power in order to pursue its goals, again, in those two regions, in the High North, with a lot of focus on Norway, and in the Black Sea region, in order to somehow get a better understanding of how the situation in both Romania and in Norway was influenced by the outbreak of the war in Ukraine in 2022. We also decided, as a part of this project, to conduct two public opinion polls, one in Norway and one in Romania, to somehow map the public mood in those two countries. And the plan today is to start by presenting the results of the survey. Then I will look into those questions related to political warfare as a kind of concept that describes various aspects of policy making. And then we will also have a very brief presentation on how to approach the information, because we will focus in this presentation on the political warfare, mostly on information-related aspects of political warfare, how to approach the information that we get access to in various channels in a critical way, which is a part of an exercise that we had within this Flanks 2 project, where we invited several students in Romania and in Norway to give them kind of deeper insights into critical approach to information, to tell them a little bit about this political warfare. And then we expect that the students are going to join their own milieus and spread the word about political warfare and critical approach to information. So this is very briefly what we plan to expose you to today. And there you have most probably looked at the program. There are some small changes in the program, especially due to the fact that one of our Romanian colleagues was not able to come. We will try to fill those gaps, but now I would like to invite my NUPI colleague Natalia Munlarsen to present the Norwegian results of the survey. Then it's going to be followed by a presentation given by our Romanian colleague, who is going to present the results of the survey in Romania, and then I will jump in and tell you more about this issue of this concept of political warfare and how to look into this in this local context. So please, Natalia, please take the place and give us some ideas about how the public mood in Norway has evolved in the aftermath of the outbreak of the war in Ukraine in 2022.
So, hi everyone. So my name is Natalia Moen-Larsen and I work here at NUPI and I'm a sociologist. And I will present some of our results to you. So, yay. So, okay, so we have recruited Sentio Research Norway to collect data from Norway in the period between 1st and 8th of March in 2023. They collected a nationally representative sample based on age, gender, and regions in Norway. And it consists of 1,004 respondents, 500 women and 504 men in the age groups between 18 and 80. And the survey was the same as in Romania, and the questions asked in the survey were about three main categories, NATO and EU, EEA. Second category was disinformation and sources of information, and finally a third category about the war in Ukraine. And for this presentation, I will mainly be focusing on the second category about disinformation and information sources. The three main issues that respondents were most concerned with in Norway were, perhaps unsurprisingly, increased energy prices, the war in Ukraine, and the health situation of self and family. And this was only 1 year after COVID, so many were concerned about health issues as well. So we found that the level of concern with the war in Ukraine steadily increased with age. For example, only 18% of age group between 18 and 24 reported this as the main concern, while 54% of the age group between 71 and 85 said that that was their main concern. And perhaps surprisingly, our data does not show that counties that were closer to Russia's border express more concern about the war in Ukraine than other counties. For example, in North Norway, Nord-Norge, only 29% reported the war in Ukraine as the main concern, and the same was for Oslo and other counties. So here we illustrate the answer to the important questions of who is to blame for the war in Ukraine. And overall, 82% of respondents said that Russia was responsible for this war. Interestingly, 11% out of the age group between 18 and 24 blamed NATO for the outbreak of the war. And this is a big percentage compared to other age groups. For example, next age group between 25 and 34, only 3% of them said that they blame NATO. And there were small regional variations for this question. For example, 88% in North Norway blamed Russia compared to 69% in Oslo. Not shown on the slide, but still relevant, is that we found that 37% of respondents thought that fake news, propaganda, and disinformation were real, while 21% they thought that it was fake, while 42% didn't even know how to answer this question. When asked, to what extent do you think that some states support propaganda disinformation actions in Norway? 34% answered largely, while 27% answered to a small degree. Almost 22% of respondents did not know how to answer this question, and there was little regional variation. So 58% of our respondents, they believed that information circulating in Norway about the war in Ukraine is generally correct, while 11% judged it to be incorrect. And out of those 11%, there were 118 respondents in total. They said that they were predominantly representative of the younger age group, and they said that 61% of them, they said that they believed that the information favors Ukraine, while 22% of those who believed that the information was incorrect, they believed that the information favors Russia. Sorry, there were... This is where do you... Oh, yeah, so, okay. Sources of information, yes. 38% of respondents claimed that they got the information about Ukraine from the television, and 33% got the information from Norwegian newspapers and websites. 11% were informed about the war through social network, and another 11% got the information from international newspapers and websites. And this results are approximately the same as from a survey about the information about the war in Ukraine that was carried out in Norway in 2022. So, and not surprisingly, the age group between 18 and 24 use social networks for information the most, while those between 65 and 80 use television the most. So 0% of respondents older than 65% use social networks for information, and less than 26% of respondents aged 44 and below used television as their primary source for information about the war in Ukraine. And an interesting regional difference is between Oslo and Nord-Norge, where only 6% of respondents from Nord-Norge claimed that they got the information about the war from social media, while 20% said the same from Oslo. And this is the final slide from me, and it's about trust in information sources in Norway and in Romania. The graph on the top left slide illustrates the level of trust in information from television in Norway in blue, and Romania in orange. And it clearly illustrates the difference in trust in information from television. In Norway, taking together, 72%, these first two columns, they say they trust television a lot or very much. So in contrast to Romania, less than 30% replied in the same way. Also, trust in internet-based sources over there is different in Romania and in Norway. We see that 54% of respondents, they replied a lot or much as indicators of their trust in news from websites and online newspapers, and in Norway. And we see that in Norway also Norwegians trust more in TV than in net-based information sources, while in Romania only 15% said that they trusted in internet-based sources a lot or very much, but still also in Romania they believe more in news from television than in news from internet-based sources. And finally, there are similar patterns in Norway and Romania in how much respondents trusted social media, such as Facebook, and messengers such as WhatsApp. And in Norway, we find that, maybe not surprisingly, that the younger respondents, they trust social media the most, while the older cohorts, they trust social media below average. But this, let me remind you that 0 of that age group reported that they use social media for information. So these answers kind of correspond together with each other, and this has to do with the familiarity that the oldest respondents have with social media use. So briefly, this was some of the results from our survey in Norway, and now I will invite our colleague up on stage to present the results from Romania.
Morning, everyone. Hello. Okay, so I promised to Jakub that I will try to speak on a fast-forward mode because, well, I have a 25-slide presentation, which is quite a lot. But it's like in that WhatsApp, you know, when you want to send voice messages and you speed up a little bit, and I will try to do exactly this thing. I choose to First of all, many thanks to NUPI, to New Strategy Center, and everybody that supported this project. We measured in this project we had 2 surveys. On the other hand, I choose to introduce in my presentation a lot of data dating from 2021 until 2024 in order to have a clear tendency and to have a general overview regarding the Romanian perception on the war in Ukraine and on all the other topics that we measured together in our research. I won't insist on methodology. We had samples of 1,100 people, representative on national level. Again, I will not insist too much. The relevant fact is that, again, you will see data from several surveys from 2021 and 2024. I will start with the level of public interest, and I will catch up with your last slide regarding the sources of information in Romania. On the other hand, I combined two elements here. Where do you usually get your information from, and what do you think are the sources of information most exposed to disinformation and the spread of fake news? And to have this comparison, I think, is very relevant. And in Romania, as you can see, the majority of the people take their information from TV. Social networks, it's on 28%. On the other hand, sources perceived as exposed to disinformation, you see that it's a reversed data. You have TV with almost 38, but social media are perceived by the majority of the Romanian public as source of disinformation in a correct manner. What is so relevant, if we analyze the profile of this perception, you will see that, for example, young people, 18 to 29, are getting their information from TV in a percentage of, let's say, 20%. But if we go to 60, plus 60, we have 80%. So it's a huge gap, 4 times bigger when we are talking about people above 60 and people about and young people. On the other hand, when we analyze social networks, you will see a total different story with young people 60% and people above 60 years with only 8% that are getting their information from social media. Moving forward, where do you get your information about the war in Ukraine? You can see here, of course, television being the main source of information. On the other hand, social network only 60-70%. If we go back, you'll see that as a general source of information, social network, social media, 28, almost 30. But when we are talking about the war in Ukraine, almost half of the people are getting their information about the war from social media, which for me and for us was very relevant and interesting. What do you think about the information circulating in Romania about the war in Ukraine? You also presented the data from Norway. In Romania, we have data from March 2023 and November 2023. So we have 1/3 of the population, generally speaking, that they think that the information are generally correct, and 40%, 42%, they think that the information are generally incorrect. So it's a different situation compared to that in Norway, where people generally believe that the information are correct. In Romania, the environment, it's a little bit different due to the disinformation, due to the lack of trust, general lack of trust in media, in institutions. So it's a total different, again, environment. And of course, we asked only those people, the next question, in European, the incorrect information are rather favor Russia or rather favor Ukraine. And you can see here a split. So half of them believe that the information are favoring Russia, and the other half think that the information are favoring Ukraine. Moving forward, who do you believe is mainly responsible for the outbreak of the war in Ukraine? And I try to bring some figures before, right after the invasion in Ukraine, so May 2022, March 2023, our survey, and the second survey, November 2023. And you can see here a huge and relevant decrease. And the tendency here, I think, is very relevant. So right after the war, 71% of Romanians believe that Russia is the main culprit Ukrainian war. Today, let's say, or 3-4 months ago, half of the Romanians believe the same thing. This is an effect of the disinformation, and you can see here how effective the disinformation process it is. On the other hand, let's say we have here 20% that moves, especially here, an increase from 8 to almost 20% of the people that don't know exactly who is to be blamed for the war. And of course, an increase here, United States. And if you analyze, for example, elements of Russian propaganda in Romania, of course, you will see and you will identify easily that USA is identified as a culprit for the war and for the outbreak of the war. We don't have time for this. Jakub? Winner of the Ukraine war. Who do you think will win the war in Ukraine? Here we also have some figures that so that we can compare the evolution of the perception. Ukraine perceived in May 2022 as the winner, Russia in May 25%, so half of the public that perceived Ukraine believed that Russia would win the war. Right now, it's an almost even situation where you have 34% and 32, let's say 33, 1/3 of the population of Romania believe that Ukraine will win, 1/3 believe that Russia will win. Maybe in a way, these figures are following the situation on the front line, because in May 2022, it was almost apparent clear that Russia is struggling and people believed, well, Ukraine will win. Now you have this blockage on the front line, so these figures probably reflect the situation again on the front line. Which countries that supports propaganda in Romania? And intentionally I introduced here figures from March 2021, so before the war, before the invasion of the Russia in Ukraine, and Russia was perceived back then in January 2022, with a month before the war, Russia perceived as the main state that supports propaganda in Romania by, let's say, one quarter of the population. After the war, we have February 2024, so figures collected 1.5 months ago. Almost half of the population believe that Russia supports propaganda actions, disinformation, and spread fake news in Romania. A decrease of European Union perceived as a supporter of propaganda, a decrease of China, and here it's a clear explanation. In March 2021 and even January 2022, there was still the debate about the pandemic and all the disinformation associated with this phenomenon. An increase of United States, of course, and a decrease here of don't know or no answer. Which country do you think represents a danger for Romania? Here things are pretty clear, and I think the figures and the graph speaks for itself. I think also it's relevant in terms of social demographics, because young people believe in a way much higher rate that Russia presents a danger for Romania, 72%. You have also a pretty decent figure for the people above 60 that still have memories regarding Russia and Soviet Union. Moving forward, providing aid to Ukraine. Do we have time? We have. Here we have some. How many? Three. Okay, I will move fast forward. There are some figures from Eurobarometer 100, and you have here Romania 71% supporting welcoming into the EU people fleeing the war. Norway, it's way much higher, it's around 90%. In Romania, for example, we have for one, let's say, radical extremist party that is promoting narratives, let's say, subversive narrative regarding refugees that are receiving way too much money instead of poor Romanians. So you have a reflection here of a political debate, and especially we are in an electoral year with 4 rounds of elections, so you can explain these figures in take into account this context. I will move forward. Solutions to stop the war. How to stop the war? I think this is also very, very relevant and consistent figures. Survey from March and November 2023 similar, so that's why they are very consistent. To stop the war, Russia should withdraw and return the occupied territories to Ukraine. We have 2/3 of Romanians believing this, and in order to stop the war, Ukraine would have to make certain concession to Russia. We have 1/4 of the population, and of course, the majority of Romanians are, let's say, are perceiving the correct way to solve this conflict. Economical impact, what is the most important issue that worries you? And as in Norway, again, we are mainly concerned of domestic internal issues. On the other hand, there is a difference. I saw in Norway around 28% of the people, let's say, preoccupied and worried about the war. Here, compared with all these other indicators, you have Ukraine, with the war in Ukraine, 12 or 9%. And if we ask people what is your biggest fear regarding the war in Ukraine, it's not Russia attacking some member states. Yes, it's 1/3 of the population, but on the other hand, you have here rising prices and cost of living. So the debate about the war in Ukraine is also dominated by internal domestic struggles related to economy and the social impact of the war. And final 3 slides in very fast forward mode. Do you personally think that Romania should leave EU? Because there is a debate, of course, and the Russian one of the main target of the Russian propaganda is Romania. It's about raw exit story or maybe leaving NATO. There is no real traction of these narratives no strong traction in Romania. We have we had almost 83% in May 22, for example, right after the invasion. 75% of the Romanians that do not imagine a raw exit scenario. When we talk about NATO, the figures are even higher here and lower regarding leave NATO. And finally, when we ask this very simple and relevant question, what do you think should be the direction Romania should go in terms of political and military alliances? 84% of the Romanians indicate West, EU, USA, NATO, and East, Russia, China, only 8%. Thank you so very much. Jakub, I hope that you are happy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, because I was a little bit amazed by your ability to go through this volume of information in such a short time. But what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to give you some better, I hope, some better understanding of the issue of political warfare, because we have been talking a lot about the issue of various types of overt and covert operation, how they may influence public opinion in both Norway and Romania. But in order to understand what is being done in this field of influence operations, it's also important to place this whole debate in the broader context. And my idea is to go through a sort of to show you, to tell you something about this debate about political warfare, what kind of political animal this political warfare is, how it is being used in the current context of the war, who is using this, and for what purposes. I will start with telling you a few words about the emergence of this concept. This is an overview of the hits this political warfare concept has received on the website of one of the most important journals dealing with international affairs, foreign affairs, and we see that there is a very steep increase in interest in this concept in the period after 2022. It's not only the number of mentions of the concept in the journal, but also a lot of focus on the debate and the discussion about the impact of the political warfare. So when we want to understand what this political warfare is all about, it's maybe best to start with this study that was published some years ago by Rand Corporation. much of what I'm going to talk about the concept itself is based on this study. This is a 400-page long study looking into the concept itself, but also into how this concept has been used by various actors, first and foremost Russia and China in the broader global context. And we can say that political warfare, this concept has in fact many names, because some people are talking about political warfare, others use this concept of hybrid warfare, but in the end of the day it's about using of non-military, non-kinetic means of instruments of power to influence the situation, to make, to somehow promote your own national interests, mostly in the field of security and in foreign affairs. So this is, to a very large extent, what states do in order to pursue their interests without resorting to military instruments of power. But it's also a concept that needs to be understood in the broader context, and this is also, those are two graphs showing that the relations between states change depending on the state of relations, meaning that when states cooperate with each other, then the issue of political warfare is much less prominent, while when the relations move from cooperation to competition, confrontation, and even conflict, then the issue of political warfare becomes much more prominent in the public debate and in the kind of policy toolbox. And this graph shows how the understanding of the political warfare concept is presented in this RAND study. So they say that there are various aspects, various instruments of power that all states use. In the American context, it's quite often is mentioned this abbreviation DIME, meaning diplomatic, information-related, military and economic instruments of power. And political warfare is about using aspects of those various instruments of power to influence policies of other countries and to pursue its own goals without resorting to military power. When it comes to various aspects of political warfare or hybrid warfare, there are, of course, economic instruments. For instance, when Russia decided to use its energy resources in order to influence policies of other countries, it's a very good example of the use of political warfare or hybrid warfare in order to influence policies of other countries. But in this presentation and in the current situation where we have war going on between Russia and Ukraine, that in Russia is also presented as a war between Russia and the collective West, I will pay most of the attention, and this is not only my choice. Many of the studies of political warfare and hybrid warfare focus and pay a lot of attention to questions related to information aspects of this political warfare. So information arena is an increasingly important battleground where perceptions of success can be determinative, and information warfare works in various ways by amplifying, obfuscating, and times persuading. So I will focus the rest of the presentation on those information-related aspects of the political warfare. And to start with, it is also important to understand how the importance of information-related instruments of power is understood in Russia. This is a statement taken directly from the foreign policy concept of the Russian Federation, where it is clearly stated that providing information to other actors, presenting Russian views and promoting Russian interests is an important element of Russian state policy. Some weeks ago, in the Institute for the Study of War published a very interesting study about what needs to be done in the West at the current stage of the war in Ukraine in order to help Ukraine win the war. And they paid a lot of attention to what is in the public debate and in expert debate called reflexive control, because one of the aspects of political warfare is that you do something in order to influence perceptions of your real or potential enemies. And according to this Institute of Study of War study that was published only a couple of weeks ago, Russian strategy in Ukraine has two tracks. One track is what they do on the battlefield, but the other track, and they argue that this is even more important, is to influence policymakers in countries that provide support to Ukraine in order to make them stop this support. And this aligns very nicely with what could be defined as Russia's operational goals in 2023. When we think about what kind of interests and objectives a state pursues, we need to think about those questions at three levels. The strategic level: what are the long-term goals, what are the long-term objectives, what kind of instruments of power are used in order to achieve those objectives. But then we also need to look at what needs to be done at the operational level, meaning in a kind of short and mid-term perspective. And I think that this list of objectives that we can suspect Russia of having at the current stage of the situation can be represent this type of issues. We know that Russia is very much interested in creating a new set of rules of the game at the global stage, but also in Europe. When Russia decided to present those two ultimatums to NATO and to the United States in December 2021, it was a very clear manifestation of Russia being interested in changing the rules of the game in Europe, because, for instance, one of the proposals was that NATO would should in fact withdraw to borders from 1997. It was about creating NATO of two speeds, where some countries were more NATO and others were less NATO, and so on and so on. So this issue of changing the rules of the game is definitely something that Russia is very much interested in. Not only Russia, because we know that China is also playing this game, Iran, some other countries. Then it's obvious that in 2023, 2024, winning a war in Ukraine is definitely one of the operational objectives. They have invested a lot of effort, paid a lot of very high price for this war. So winning the war is definitely something that is close to the top of the Russian public agenda, political agenda. In order to to achieve this objective, it's also very clear an understanding in Russia that if the West stops its support to Ukraine, then Ukraine is going to lose the war and Russia is going to win this war. So stopping this Western support to Ukraine is definitely one of the aspects. One of the ways of achieving this objective is to intimidate the West. The mentions of nuclear strikes in Ukraine or in other places. Sergei Karaganov, one of the leading Russian experts, published a year ago an article where he aired the idea that Russia should strike nuclearly in Europe in order to put an end to the war. So this issue of intimidation of the West is also very high on the agenda. And then Russians are perfectly aware of how the Western system works. So one of the issues that they also want to achieve is to change the mood of the public opinion in Europe and in the collective West most broadly, to weaken the trust among the members of the Western community. We saw that, for instance, countries like Hungary and Slovakia have adopted policies within NATO and the EU that are not necessarily completely in line with this collective support to Ukraine idea. And then it's also very much, to a very large extent, the issue of undermining the trust between people and political elites in the Western societies. We see this happening in the UK on the brink of Brexit. We see this happening in France. The growth of Alternative für Deutschland is also, to a certain extent, an expression of this lack of trust between public opinion and political elites. We need also to understand that it's not only in the West that we think about political warfare. This issue of information operations, influence operations has also received a lot of attention in the Russian public and expert debate. Those are the conclusions that were drawn in the Strand report about the effects of this Russian approach. They argue that Russia does not have any kind of of long-term strategy of using this. It's mostly about acting in an opportunistic manner. They see an opportunity and they try to use this opportunity in order to influence the situation. It's also about Russia trying to penetrate various types of media. With the growth of social media, it's much easier because you don't have to create a newspaper in a country like Norway. You can use cyberspace, digital space in order to send the message, to convey the message to the Norwegian population. For instance, some years ago, Sputnik, which is one of the key actors in the Russian information space, had an ambition to have a website presenting the Russian views to the Norwegian public in Norwegian. But then it turned out that it was costly. They maybe had no people who could translate this information from Russian to Norwegian. So they, after some months, they decided to close down the Norwegian version of Sputnik. But still, Sputnik is available in many languages, not in Norwegian. And then we also have to understand that Russia has been investing heavily in various propaganda instruments. I will tell you a few words about this later on. But those three aspects are important. It's about Russian opportunism, meaning although Russia has created a kind of framework where this information is to be conveyed to the Western public, it's at least believed by many is an opportunistic rather than a strategic project. But we need to have this good understanding that what is available in media, especially in social media, is very easily influenced by Russian operations, and this fact that Russia has invested a lot in building its propaganda machine is also very important. And number of studies have been published over the past 10 years about Russia's influence operations, what kind of instruments of power Russia is using in order to influence public opinion in other countries. I have put some of the names of the articles and books on this slide. If you want to dig deeper into those questions, it's one of the best sources to go to this book that was published some years ago by a group of Western experts on the Russian Federation participation in the global knowledge warfare. It's not only about influencing political aspects of situation, but also about Russia using various other types of instruments. And when we talk about the political warfare in the information space, we need to understand that there are three aspects of the situation. It's about information space. We all relate to information in one way or another through looking at TV programs, using newspapers, using various types of social media. So we are a part of an information space. So this information space is something where those operations, influence operations, take place. Then it's also important to understand that it's also about the content of the information. So what is being said, what is being presented is also very important in this context. And then in order to be able to reach those audiences you want to reach, you need to also create a sort of information infrastructure. And some years ago, NATO Center of Excellence on Strategic Communication published this very interesting study on Russia media landscape, where they outline the kind of institutional framework of Russian information infrastructure. And those who have been working on those questions for some time understand perfectly well that there are some Russian organizations that try to play this information game not only in Russia but also abroad. RT, that used to be known as Russia Today, is one of those elements of Russian information structure. Sputnik, that I have already mentioned, and this those information operations are target not only audience in Russia but also to a very large extent audience in other countries. And according to another study published quite recently, there are different levels of visibility of Russian presence. On the one hand, we have those official government communication channels like ministries, official Russian social media, newspapers. In the other end of the spectrum of this invisibility spectrum, we have actors who are not very easily associated with Russia, but who somehow convey messages that are very much in line with what Russia wants to convey of information. And it's also important to understand how all those issues are done. A number of books and reports have been published. One of the first ones to pay a lot of attention to the Russian propaganda machine is Marcel van Herpen, who published this book even before the outbreak of the war on Putin's propaganda machine. European Union has decided to pay a lot of attention to those Russian efforts, and they have established even a special unit at the EAS, the External Action Service at the European Union, and this unit has published already 2 reports about various types of influence operations. And when you decide to use information-related tools of power, then it's mostly about informing, persuading, convincing, or tempting. It's also about influencing policies of other countries. And according to this EAS report, the 4 D aspects of political and information warfare is the issue of distracting, disrupting, dissuading, and distorting. Those are the key somehow tools that are used in order to present information in a way that is in line with Russia's political objectives. And this graph is also taken from one of those EA studies. It presents a kind of Russian information ecosystem, various aspects of this information ecosystem that we all those who are interested in those questions need to have a good understanding of. In 2020, NATO's Strategic Center of Excellence in Riga, that works mostly on issues related to strategic communication, published a very interesting report on Russia's footprint in the Nordic-Baltic information environment. This study is available on the website. The link is provided over there. They went through various aspects of political and information operations that Russia has launched in the Baltic countries and in the Nordic countries, and their main conclusion is that some countries in the Nordic Baltic region are more exposed to those Russian information-related attempts, and Norway is definitely one of the countries that is more exposed than a country like Finland. Iceland is not very much present in those Russian information-related efforts, and this study has also identified a number of topics that Russian media channels aimed at influencing situation in the countries have launched. For instance, in 2018, in the context of Norway, a lot of attention was paid to questions related to refugees and migration as a destabilizing factor. Since Norway is also an important actor in the energy field, a lot of attention was paid also to the issue of Nord Stream 2 as a way of strengthening energy connection between Russia and the rest of Europe. At that moment, there were some issues related to child welfare conflicts between Russia and Norway, but also between Norway and other countries. So Russian media paid a lot of attention to those questions related to Barnevarne. This whole idea that Russia could pose a threat was also ridiculed in Russian media presentations aimed at the Norwegian audience. There were a lot of warnings about the rise of the right-wing politics in the country. Islamic fundamentalism was also presented as a challenge, and so on and so on and so on. So, this study is based on the situation in 2020. No newer studies has been published, but in order to understand how this information space has changed in the aftermath of the outbreak of war, I decided to look at what has been identified as the key elements of this information warfare going on in Europe, as presented in those two EEA's annual reports about foreign influence and manipulation operations. So in 2023, in the report that was published early in 2023, it was argued that the main focus of Russian information operations is on the situation in Ukraine, that Russia has been actively using various types of diplomatic channels in order to influence the situation in the countries. For instance, when the new Russian ambassador to Moscow came, he activated the Russian embassy in Oslo. They have been writing letters to Norwegian newspapers. They have presented a list of concerns that the Russian embassy has in the context of the Norwegian policy, and there has been a lot of activity. He gave a number of interviews to NRK, to the national broadcaster. He was interviewed by many Norwegian newspapers. So this was this way of using these diplomatic channels in order to present the Russian message. It's about various types of collusion, meaning that a number of studies have, for instance, been published about to what extent the Chinese information warfare follows the same ideas as the ones we find in the Russian context. There are still different understandings, and then it's also about Russia operating in a kind of multilingual environment, presenting those views not only in Russian but also in English, French, Arabic, you name it. And according to this 2023 study, a lot of has happened through using various types of images and videos, because this is something that reaches the public relatively quickly and has a huge impact. This situation has not changed very much in 2024. Still, Ukraine is the main area of focus, but we also see that there is a very direct link between what is happening and how what is happening is being presented in this information sphere. And there is, one can say that in 2024 the situation is much more complex, and then we also expect that Russia is using a more diverse toolbox in order to influence the situation. And this is one of those reports also published where those Russian influence operations have taken place, and we see that the main focus is on the key countries in the European Union. Germany, France, but also Poland has been somehow tried to be influenced, but a lot of focus is also on influencing the situation and public opinion in the United States, while those Russian efforts are almost non-existent in Asia and to a very limited extent in other parts of the world, Africa to a certain extent, because Russia has increased its strategic presence in Africa, but for instance in Latin America there have been no incidents related to Russian influence operations. I was some years ago involved in a project where we tried to map what kind of narratives Russia has been using in order to convey its message. And one of the aspects that is still very highly representative and relevant was the way Russia presented NATO as an actor. And we, after having studied a number of Russian messages conveyed by Russian media, we landed with 5 key narratives that the West and NATO inclusive is operating in a kind of irresponsible and aggressive manner, that NATO enlargement meant a kind of historical break. That was this whole debate about to what extent NATO had promised Russia not to enlarge. Then there was a lot of focus about the discrepancies between NATO and the US actors operating in the international international space. It was about domestic political discord within NATO countries. Hungary was definitely one of the countries, but also others. And then one of the key messages conveyed by Russian media targeting Western public was that Europe is not was not a kind of independent actor, that what Europe was doing was mostly due to the pressure being put on Europe by the United States. And when we think about those operational objectives that I presented some time ago, and those narratives, we also can use this as a way of assessing to what extent those Russian influence operations have been successful, at least in the Norwegian context. And I decided to list those operational goals on the one hand, and present a very rough assessment of to what extent these operations, this Russian influence made an impact. And we see that when it comes to winning the war in Ukraine, the war is still going on after more than 2 years. So we can say that those operations have not brought an end to the conflict in Ukraine. To what extent Russia has managed to influence the global and regional agenda? Yes, it is definitely the case, because there has been much more attention being paid to Russian information operations. So this could be said to be a kind of success story. To what extent Russia increased the support or understanding for its policy in Europe? To a certain extent, what has been happening in Hungary, Slovakia may be an example of this type of influence, but on the other hand, in most of the countries, Russian views are still being approached in a very critical manner, so Russia has not managed to change the mood in the most important countries. To what extent what Russia has been doing in the information space has contributed to weakening the trust among key allies? We saw that under the Donald Trump presidency, this issue of trust among allies was weakened, but not necessarily due to the fact that Russia has tried to influence public opinion. It was most probably due to some domestic political developments in the United States. So we cannot judge this as being a success of Russian information operations. And we know also that American authorities have paid a lot of attention to measuring the impact the Russian influence operations have had on the election results in 2016, and the main conclusion was that there were some Russian operations, but the effect, the result of elections have not been influenced to a very large extent by those Russian operations. So to what extent Russian operations in the information sphere have weakened Europe's resilience, defense or deterrence potential? Here Russia has lost the game, because what Russia has been doing on the battleground in Ukraine, but also in the information space, rather contributed to increasing cooperation in Europe on those questions. Europe has been investing much more in its defense and seeking closer cooperation. To what extent Russia, through those operations, have contributed to changing perception of Russia as a great power? Definitely, Russia has come back as a source of concern to most of the European and Western policymakers. So this was a success, but also the price was very high, because this return of Russia as a great power, the perception of Russia as a great power, came at a very high price. The economic cooperation with the West was almost put on hold. And then there is also a number of other issues. So we can say that judging by the results, and this brings me to my last point, that judging by those very rough assessments, those operations were not very successful, but here we come to the final question. it's very difficult to both map and measure the impact of those influence operations, because they take place in a very volatile information space, and we have made some attempts by, for instance, conducting those two public opinion polls in Norway and in Romania to map the public mood, but we can only have some ideas about to what extent the public mood is being influenced by Russian information operations, but to provide any kind of any clear ideas to measure the impact is very difficult. So we need to understand that something is happening. We have some ideas what is being done, but measuring the impact is very difficult. This will be my last conclusion, and I think that maybe I will drop the last presentation on or maybe we can go next to the next presentation, which is I will tell you very few words about what we did with those students, because we understand and we know that from, for instance, from those public opinion polls that Natalia and our Romanian colleague have just presented, that at least some groups in the Western societies in Romania, but also in Norway, especially younger generation, is very much interested in learning what is happening out in the world from various types of social media. So it is important somehow to increase the level of understanding that not all information that you find in your WhatsApp, on Facebook, on Twitter is something that you need to believe in. So what we did was that we decided to invite a number of students in Norway and in Romania, and we organized workshops with them in order to share with them some of the ideas about this importance of this political warfare, hybrid warfare, what Russia has been doing in the context of the war in Ukraine, how the public opinion changed in Romania and in Norway. But the idea was first and foremost to make them, to give them a better understanding of how you need to approach information that you find in various channels in a critical manner. So we decided, based on some proposals given to us by our Romanian colleagues, on what is called CRAP method. And the CRAP method is something that is used in order to figure out to what extent the information that you get, that you find, is something that you could rely on or not. We know that there are various aspects of this information and these information campaigns. To start, we have some facts that can be presented in various ways. They can be presented in a way that has nothing to do with the reality. This could be done either on purpose, where we have to do with disinformation, where disinformation is distorted in order to achieve an objective. And then we can also have some, for instance, journalists who do not pay a lot of attention to checking the facts, and they present something as misinformation. So this is about how to approach various types of information. I already presented this one to show you that the situation is difficult, but it's not only about information infrastructure, but it's also about the content. So what we have paid a lot of attention to in this workshop with the students was this CRAP method. And CRAP method is about looking at 4 aspects of information that you find. It's about looking at the currency, reliability, authority, and purpose. And I will now go to those 4 aspects to somehow make you also aware of the fact that you can be exposed to information that needs to be approached in a critical manner. Currency, to what extent what you look at is something that relates to some current events. For instance, you can find a lot of information about the reasons for the outbreak of the war in Ukraine that are not based on information information that was made available when the war broke out. So this is about assessing whether the resource is from an appropriate time, whether it's something that was published originally or something that is being reproduced by some other actors, to what extent the information that you look at has been updated and revised, and to what extent the information you find is something that is important for you to have when trying to understand the current situation. Then it's also about reliability. It's about to what extent you think that you can rely on the information you find. Did the author use any evidence and show the sources with citation and references, or whether we have to do only with some opinions expressed by someone who has no expertise in the field, and so on and so on. For instance, some years ago I did a study on how the issue of the Baltic pipe, this connector between Norway, Denmark and Poland, has been presented in Russian media, and I found, for instance, Sputnik making a reference to an energy expert who meant that this project was something that was difficult to understand from a purely economic point of view. And then I decided to check who this expert was, and it turned out that there is no person having this type of name, and the institution he was supposed to represent was also non-existent. So this is also about this type of issues. It's important to change, to check the situation concerning reliability. And then it's also about to what extent the information you get access to is being produced by someone who is an expert in his field, or whether it's something that, for instance, some people who are very deeply involved in these various types of conspiration theories present on their websites. And then it's also about what is the reason of this information being published, because when you read something that is can be described as an op-ed, then it's mostly about expressing some views and ideas. This is something completely different from an academic journal that is based on a very thorough examination of available sources and so on and so on. So those four issues of the scrap method, the currents, reliability, authority, and purpose is very important to have in mind when you look at information. It goes not only for those students who were exposed to those trainers, but also to all people who somehow have to relate to information that comes from various sources. And this is something that I would like to end my contribution with. And now we have like approximately 20 minutes for a discussion of various types of information-related challenges in both broader but also in the narrow Norwegian and Romanian context. I would like to invite Natalia and you. Yes. So the floor is open for questions, and we will be very happy to provide you some informed answers.
No more questions.
Everything is clear.
Everything is perfectly clear.
That's
Maybe
just very
we should ask questions.
Name. Well, yes, there is one question over there.
Good morning. Ion Ioniță is my name. I'm from Romania. Concerning your surveys, which are the most vulnerable public in Romania and Norway to propaganda, to Russian propaganda?
You start with Romania, please.
Okay.
Yes.
I think in the first, right before the Russian invasion, it was clear for us from all of our researches that the young people were the most vulnerable. And whenever we tried, for example, to identify the social demographic profiles of people that had a high level of trust in Russia or in Vladimir Putin, we discovered that young people, meaning 18 to 29, had higher levels of trust in Russia and Vladimir Putin, and perceived Vladimir Putin, for example, through the length of social media, you know, his campaign of portraying himself as a very savvy leader with the bears, with always try to portray himself as energetic and vibrant leader. After the war, especially in the last 1 year and a half, we observed that among young people, the level of trust in Russia, it's really, really low. I mean, generally in Romania, for example, right now, the level of trust in Russia decreased from 16 to 18% before the war to around 7-8% now, high and very high level. And the level of trust in Vladimir Putin decreased from 2022 to around 10, 12, something like that. Vladimir Putin is always a little bit above Russia. But right now, even among young people, the level of trust in Russia it's very low. So right now, I think the most vulnerable group, and this is a surprise for me, I have to admit, it's are people which are very active, and probably they are more affected by socio-economical crisis, but I'm speaking about people among between 30 and 59, let's say. People that are very active, young families. They are vulnerable to Russian propaganda, because Russian propaganda, especially in Romania, also try to tackle with economical and social aspects of the war, of the crisis, and from what I can see now among this group, I can see again vulnerabilities in terms of effects of Russian propaganda.
Yeah, no, so as we saw from the presentation, Norway and Romania has very different positions on this, and also different level of trust in information that they get from a variety of sources. And also in Norway, we don't have the same situation with a lot of information campaigns from Russia that are really trusted in by the population. In Norway there is a huge level of support to Ukraine and skepticism towards Russia. However, we found, as I said, that out of the people who did not completely trust in the information about the war in Ukraine that we find in Norway, those 11%, they were mostly young people, and what they said that the information is positively biased to prioritize Ukraine. But I don't know whether that is we can claim that is a result of a Russian information campaign, or just like young people being taught to think critically about information. So it's as Jakob said, it's very difficult to say what is an effect of an information campaign, because you know that Russia is doing that type of warfare, but we don't know how to find it or determine it. I mean, we know how to see. We can see like posts or Sputnik or RT, but the effect between the information campaign and its reception is very difficult to determine, and especially for Norway, where the results are not as clear as in Romania, I would say.
One can also say that prior to the outbreak of the war, there was this most probable expectation in Russia that there would be some, maybe not huge, but some differences in approaches in the northern part of Norway, the one that is closest to the Russian border, where there was this sort of historical positive experience of being liberated by the Red Army in 1944, and the other parts of the country. But after the outbreak of the war, the situation has changed, and the same level of criticism is to be towards Russia is to be found both in the northern part of Norway and the southern part of Norway. I can tell you from my personal experience, some months ago I was in Tromsø, a city located in the northern part of Norway, going by bus from the city center to the university, and then I saw a person whom I knew. he knew me as well. It was Rune Rafaelsen, who used to be the mayor in Kirkenes, the city closest, the Norwegian city closest to the Norwegian border. And we entered into a conversation, and I asked him what he is doing in Tromsø, and he told me that he is member of the board of the university, that he is going to take part in the meeting of the board, but he also mentioned that he is going to pay a visit to the postal office at the university, and I asked him, what are you going to do at the in the postal office? I have my friendship medal that I got from Putin that I plan to send back to him. So this was a very clear manifestation of this change of the mood in the northern part of Norway. He used to be very staunch supporter of Russian-Norwegian cooperation, especially at the kind of local level. He was involved in a number of projects with Russian counterparts of the Russian side of the border, and he was also viewed as a person who was genuinely interested and devoted to developing this good neighborly relationship with Russia. And then after the outbreak of the war, he decided to put his medal in the envelope and send it back to Vladimir Putin. So this was also a very clear manifestation of the changing mood in Norway. Although we need to understand that even in a country like Norway, there are groups that still somehow mean that what Putin is doing is the right thing to do.
I just wanted to add something about Romania. I think this is very relevant. A classical Russian propaganda, it's almost impossible in Romania due to historical and cultural aspects. Imagine that in a country where we faced, for example, in the last 170 years, 11 Russian invasions, on our territory. It's impossible in different regimes. Even during the communist regime, there wasn't a love story between Romanian Communist Party and the Soviet Union. I wrote a PhD. My PhD is on Soviet measures targeted against Romania after 1964. So it was never a love story. How Russian propaganda can be successful in Romania is through different proxies, and mainly fake nationalistic proxies, like we have now in Romania, a political party that has a very radical, from my perspective, fake nationalistic approach, and they will just share, they will spread Russian narratives, which are, of course, subversive, but on the other hand, they cannot be successful for the large part of the population. As we saw in our surveys, and we are not talking about only one picture, but I try to present tendencies along the time, so during a long period of time. Let's say more than 3/4 of the population are immune to this kind of propaganda apparatus and narratives. And from this perspective, the orientation of Romania, it's clearly on let's say, on the West. On the other hand, yes, using this kind of proxies that are trying to use nationalistic, let's say, narratives, they can spread confusions, and sometimes, especially for the public that is vulnerable in terms of social and economical aspects. Sorry.
Hello. So thanks for the very insightful presentations. I had two issues that I was curious about. First of all, you mentioned that youngsters are a bit different in their opinions towards Russia, and given the fact that youngsters also have a tendency to take their information from social media platforms, do you think there is a correlation with how much disinformation or information manipulation there is on social media platforms that young Norwegians frequent, and the views that you measured in your poll? And the other question was related to the perception of general Russian information interference in Norway, which was somewhere over 80%. But I think you said that in Oslo there was a lower perception of Russian information meddling, and I was very curious of your insight into that result. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just trying to remember the numbers. Okay, can I just take my notes. Thank you. Okay, when it comes to the number of young people who are skeptical, who didn't know whether the information they find in Norway about the war in Ukraine is correct. That's the first point. So it was like 11% of the whole data set, so approximately or a bit over 100 people, and the largest percentage of them were young people. But they didn't say that the information, they didn't say anything about Russian side of things. The question in the survey was designed in a way that they only could say whether the information is biased towards Ukraine or Russia. So they said it's biased towards Ukraine. And you can see that in Norway, I guess in Norwegian media, the information has been clearly positive towards you. So all criticism has been going towards the Russian side, and all positive news are about Ukraine. So perhaps that's what we measured, actually. So we don't know. So this is I guess the weakness of the type of data that we have, that we don't really, we can go back to the informants or we can in a separate study, but we haven't done it in this study. We haven't asked them what do you mean, right? So that's why there can be like different answers to that question. It can be that maybe because they are social media users, that they get more information from like are more Russia influence campaigns, are more exposed to Russian information campaigns. Yes, that may be. But we don't have any data that I would say can tell us if that's true 100%. Yeah, and the same, I guess, also goes to Oslo versus north of Norway. I don't. It was like, I think it was 69% of respondents from Oslo who said that the Russia who put the blame on Russia. That's the and over 80% other places. And I don't really have the numbers why that might be. There could be big percentage that didn't reply even from Oslo. I'm not sure. So but it's also, I think the survey results we have are very interesting, but I would like to ask the people more in depth, actually. So I think there needs some more follow-up studies.
Yeah, always.
Yes.
When commenting on this kind of generational differences, it's also important to have in mind what Otto von Bismarck once said, that when you are 20, it's okay to be socialist. When you are 30, being socialist is something that is difficult to understand. And I mean not only, I don't want to put any blame on socialism or socialists as such, but younger people are more quite often much less critical towards the world, and much more critical towards what they see as a kind of mainstream. So this kind of those generational differences can also be caused by simple the fact that there are some differences in the way various type of people with different types of personal experiences approach the situation. I can expect that, and you mentioned this, that those people who still have this personal memory of living in the communist paradise on earth approach Russian approaches in much more critical manner than those who have not experienced this, and this can also explain some of the differences. Although in Norway we did not have this experience of living under kind of, but still, I think that this can also be a part of the explanation. And what those two public opinion polls have clearly revealed and demonstrated is that the huge majority of people in both Norway and Romania identify themselves as being part of the West, and this also is very much confirmed by their strong support for membership in Western organizations, NATO in the case of Norway, and Romania and NATO and the EU in the case of Romania. So this is also clearly shows that those views are to a very large extent also a function of how they identify themselves in terms of in the broader terms. Yeah.
A microphone will come your way.
Heinz Patrick, I'm from the Ministry of Internal Affairs. I have a question for Mr. Jakub. Would you say that the Russian disinformation campaign touch more on your sensitive themes, insightful themes in your country, or is referential with your profound way of life or values, or is a more general approach, something very chaotic or speculative? Thank you.
Those who study those influence, backlash, information operations are very much interested in seeing this type of operations as being tailored to the local context. And in the case of Norway, the local context is namely this kind of relatively positive experience of relating to Russia in the High North, where the Red Army came in 1944 and liberated, and not only liberated, but also decided to withdraw back to the Soviet Union, which was not the case in many other places where the Red Army came as liberators, but decided to stay for a little bit longer time than in Norway. So this is part of the local context, and we know, for instance, that one of the sensitive issues over the past couple of years was the celebration of the liberation of the northern part of Norway, because there were very different voices and opinions being expressed at those type of celebrations. Last year, for instance, there was an intervention by the Russian consulate in Kirkenes, and then there was also a Russian lady who also decided to do something in order to present Russia in a more positive manner. So this type of local sensibilities is definitely something that would be used. But then the big question is also to what extent people who decide on those information campaigns in Russia have this knowledge, this detailed knowledge of the local nitty-gritties and sensitivities. And we saw that some of those operations were far off the target in a way. They were not tailored, but we also know that different countries face different types of challenges. In a country like Latvia or Estonia, where fair share of population is of Russian origins, has been also for many years being influenced by Russian media that were available in those countries. The situation is slightly different than in Norway, where you have a kind of people of Russian origins in Norway represent a very small share of population, like between 15 and 20,000 people with origins from Russia live in Norway, so they are not exposed to a very large extent, and they live spread all over the country, although there is a fairly higher share of them living close to the Russian border, but still it's not a group that is going to have a huge impact on the Norwegian policy making, but most probably they are taken into some account by those who shape those information operations. Yes, yes.
Tomasz Orłowski, Embassy of Poland to Norway. I will also have a question to our Romanian colleague. Maybe it's a side topic question, but I think it's extremely important also in order to increase our common resilience to Russian pressures and Russian information campaigns. You have showed us on one of your slides that more or less roughly 20% of Romanian population still does not fully support Romanian membership in the European Union. My question is, do you think that the most recent decision on a partial solution of this Schengen question will help to somehow reduce this percentage and to further increase cohesion of Romanian moods with the Western, to increase the pro-Western sympathies on the, of Romanian society. How is it in general perceived in Romania as a non-satisfactory partial thing offered to Romanian nation, or rather as a step in the right direction which can help increase this cohesion, let's say, of Romania inside the EU?
Thank you so much. First of all, I have to admit that it was for the first time that I traveled without any passport through the airport from Bucharest to Oslo, which was absolutely amazing. So I was beneficiary at the first site of this excellent decision. Yes, Schengen issue, it was an issue of frustration for, and it still is a huge issue of frustration for the Romanian people. And we measured this in our surveys. The majority of population perceive that this is an unjust decision, keeping us out of Schengen. Even if we were prepared, I mean, we have here people from Minister of Interior who can confirm that we are prepared to join Schengen. We were prepared since I think 2010, so 15 years ago. So we can understand the frustration. On the other hand, when we still don't have a decision of fully accession to Schengen area, and the debate in Romania was focused only on Austria decision. I mean, the majority of population perceived correctly that EU, European Parliament, European Commission, all the other 25 member states supported Romania strongly. One country unfortunately didn't, and the only connection that was made in Romania was that Austria, besides their electoral debates, internal electoral debates, was also a kind of supporter of, let's say, Russian narratives in order to divide, let's say, support for EU. On the other hand, yes, this partial accession I think helps. We have a lot of Romanians that travels through airports to EU countries, and definitely will help. But we expect, and from all I've been hearing from our authorities, we expect a fully accession membership this year. I think this would help, and hopefully that it will happen. Regarding that 20%, let's say people that are skeptical about EU, it's a minority, of course, compared to 75-80% the people that reject any raw exit or whatever. I think we always had in our society, and if we compare, let's say, attitudes regarding EU in all the other Central and Eastern European countries, we will see that the figures are pretty good in Romania. We always had the 20% of the population that were rather skeptical about, I don't know, even democracy, if you want. We had, and you can overlap this 20% of the population with the political parties that were on the extreme part of the political spectrum. It's nothing extraordinary. It's rather a normal situation, and sometimes we can think that we live in a democracy, and 100% support for one issue maybe is not the best thing, especially if we remember our communism experience.
Thank you for your last answer, because we don't have much more time. I would also mention that discussing support for EU membership in the Norwegian context would be even much more challenging than discussing EU support for Romanian membership in the EU in the Romanian context. But I'm happy to have seen so many of you coming here and joining us in this discussion. We hope very much that this cooperation between NUPI and the New Strategy Center is going to continue, that so you must expect to see us again, maybe not in the same composition, but at least some colleagues coming from Romania presenting some Romanian views on those important questions. We would like also to encourage you to take a look at NUPI and NSC website, because we are about to publish a report on those questions on the issue of political warfare in the context of the High North and the Black Sea region. And this event has also been streamed, so those who want to go back can go using NUPI's YouTube channel. And again, thank you for coming, and hope very much that this discussion is going to continue in one or another form, because those are important questions that are not going to disappear from the academic and policy-making agenda, most probably. Unfortunately, one can say. Thank you, and please enjoy the rest of the day.